Welcome back. You're watching the program Into the Discussion segment, and we will be having interruptions in between. But first, we start with the breaking news of the Jubilee Party Secretary General Raphael Tuju, and equally a cabinet minister without a portfolio, has been involved in an accident while heading to Kabarak in Nakuru County to attend the funeral service of the late Mzee Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. We are having breaking news here on the program of the Jubilee Party Secretary General Raphael Tuju and the Cabinet Secretary without portfolio involved in an accident while heading to the Kabarak home of Mzee Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi to take part in the funeral service of Mzee, who will be laid to rest today. So far, the information we have is that he has been admitted at the Kijabe Hospital, getting medication, awaiting, of course, the outcome. And we will be, of course, giving you an update once we have here on the program. And from Kijabe Hospital, he will be later taken to Nairobi Hospital here in Nairobi, where further medication will be diagnosed for the Jubilee Party Secretary General Raphael Tuju, who was involved in an accident this morning while heading to Kabarak home of Mzee Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi in Nakuru County, where Mzee will be laid to rest. The Cabinet Secretary without portfolio was heading towards Nakuru County, where Mzee will be laid to rest today, 12th of February 2020, 8 days after he passed on in Nairobi Hospital peacefully, according to the members of his family, who are led by Baringo Senator Gideon Moi. Therefore, that is the breaking news that we have so far. And before we went on break, the pictures that we have been showing you live from Wilson Airport was that of a military chopper ferrying the body of the late President Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, belonging to the Kenya Air Force. And only one family member of the Moi family was allowed to be on board that chopper that will be touching down in the next 26 minutes or so at the Nakuru Kabarak home of Mzee Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. From there, the gun carriage, the military gun carriage vehicle that was taking over the charge of transporting the body of Mzee Daniel Arap Moi from the Lee Funeral Home on the first day of the state viewing to Parliament on Saturday, led by President Uhuru Kenyatta, who jetted into the country on the Friday preceding that particular Saturday and led Kenyans in view of the body of Mzee Daniel Arap Moi. Then on Sunday and on Monday and yesterday, on Tuesday, the body was taken from the Lee Funeral Home to State House in Nairobi, where President Uhuru Kenyatta paid his respects, and then later to the Nyayo National Stadium from Processional Way to Kenyatta Avenue, inbound the Nyayo House roundabout, Uhuru Highway, then later to the intersection roundabout of Haile Selassie, then to the Bunyala Road intersection, and then to Lusaka Road intersection, and then gained entry at the Nyayo National Stadium, where thousands of Kenyans, among them 6 heads of state, Djibouti's Ismail Omar Gele, South Sudan's Salva Kiir, and Ethiopian President Sele, and equally representatives from other countries in the African continent across the world, members of the diplomatic corps. Among them also other heads of states were 2 former presidents of Tanzania, President Benjamin Mkapa, who read the eulogy of President John Pombe Magufuli, and Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, who recalled Moi as a statesman who fancied the region galvanization, stabilization of the East African region, made efforts towards the stabilization following the collapse of the East African community in the late 1970s, and other heads of state who equally eulogized Moi as perhaps a person who loved peace, who loved stabilization, who loved the cohesive nature of the East African community. And President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni equally eulogized him as a man who cherished peace and brought together all the warring factions in Uganda at a time when the country was in political crisis before Museveni came to power in 1986. And we will be giving you live update and coverage, live pictures from the home of Mzee Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi in Kabarak, Nakuru County, shortly after we get them, as the military chopper is still airborne with the body of Mzee Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi from the Wilson Airport, where the military has taken charge. And we now delve into the discussion and the viewpoints of President Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi's 10 years President of the Republic of Kenya from 1924 when he was born. But actually what started in 1978 was so important when he became the president, after he was elected unopposed and inherited or took over or succeeded President Jomo Kenyatta Sr., the founder of the nation, until 2002 when he handed over power. A lot happened, and including the 1982 foiled military coup, and re-elected for MP Baringo Central in 1983. In 1989, 1989, he banned ivory worth 60 million Kenya shillings, demonstrating his commitment towards environment conservation. In 1990, abolished the queuing of the Mlolongo system of voting in the country. And in 1993, Moi sworn in as Kenya's president after winning the first multi-party election of 1992, despite human rights violation reports by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and other lobby groups accusing the YK92, and equally what culminated in 2002 when he handed over power to President Emilio Mwai Kibaki. Gentlemen, I do appreciate your time. On my far right is the former Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Farah Maalim, who served in the early 90s as Member of Parliament. You were called the orphans of Odinga when he passed on, isn't it? Good morning, and thank you for coming. And Professor Hezron Mugambi commentates on governance, political issues in the country. Honorable Fala, to just start with you, a lot has happened, and yesterday, one of the eulogy points that captured my attention was President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who said besides reaching out to the warring factions in Uganda, Moi was more towards the attainment of unity, towards the attainment of stable region, and he showed commitment at a time when the war on terror just started in 2001 and Kenya was viewed as the blue-eyed boy in the fight against terror, a campaign by the United States of America. Diplomatical from that end, then how did he manage to balance the cards at the height of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, in the late 1990s when Kenya never received any aid for a period of 10 years, how he managed to run the economy, and then later handing over power to Emilio Mwai Kibaki in 2002?
He was gifted. And he was a proud leader who trusted his own judgment and the judgment of those who are around him, and who did not defer. He understood the dynamics of politics. He understood the power of the mighty states in the globe, the superpowers and the economic giants and all those. China wasn't such a powerful giant those days, but he understood all those dynamics. And he very cleverly navigated his way around that. He was very close to the Gulf Arabs. He had his private, not so private, but very close relationship with the State of Israel as an individual. And you have to understand that his private doctor was Dr. Silverstein.
Yes.
He was a Jew himself, by the way. And at the same time, he had his friendship as well as issues. He had his cold and warm relationships with the Americans on different occasions. He did not. He took advantage of the rivalries that were there at that time, because one of the things that I remember very well is that when the Americans, the World Bank, the IMF, and all those were becoming very hard on us, he paid a trip to Iran. And I want to believe that there were some oil deals that make it easier for this country to access cheaper oil that time, because we didn't have the amount of foreign exchange that we needed to be able to service our imports that well. There were imports restrictions. Okay. There was convertible currency restrictions in the country, so you had to go through a very long rigmarole before you can be allowed to import something from outside, Central Bank and a number of other places. You had to have those licenses. And then later on, when we had the first, the repeal of Section 2A, he liberalized the money market, and he allowed businessmen and women from this country to literally go anywhere.
Okay.
And there were no more restrictions on the foreign exchange in the country. And at the same time, the thing that happened to us that really saved our economy, and most Kenyans don't seem to understand that, is that with those restrictions from the World Bank and IMF, that push by the developed world those days to push us into a corner because of the changes in the global discourse, political discourse, from the Cold War, capitalism versus socialism at that time, the Soviet bloc and the American bloc. Yep. Now, of course, the communism lost, and the focus shifted right now on democracy, human rights, and other dynamics, other narratives, which we were not very good at ourselves. You see what I mean? So because of that shift, it coincided with a very sad incident that happened, the collapse of the Somali state.
In 1991.
In 1991. And the same 1991 is when actually Section 2A was repealed. So by 1991, we had an avalanche of Somalis, all propertied, rich people, the senior people in the system, came to live in Kenya. So suddenly, Kenya was awash with the dollars from that side. The dollars from that side. And then, of course, the refugee camps were set up in here, and there were hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers who were also in our urban settings here. Mombasa had a refugee camp in Otange. Marafa was somewhere else, also in Kilifi district. There was Walda, and then of course the international community had to focus also on mitigating those humanitarian crises.
Okay.
So in that process, there was a lot of agencies that came in, and a lot of convertible currency. A lot of dollars got into the
which
market.
kept the economy going.
Of course, it kept the economy in a serious way. So much so that we were actually at a very critical crossroads when these things happened. And if it had not happened, we probably would have gone a little bit closer to the Zimbabwe way. But then that was this misfortune that happened in our neighbors.
Okay.
Will help it a lot. And you have to understand there was again the Rwanda genocide 1994. Which also came with its own dynamics. This country being the only country that had a functioning so-called pseudo-democracy that time. A lot of emphasis was on here. We had a functioning democracy. I was a member of parliament that time, where the opposition was there. Then, of course, the issues that happened in Burundi. I don't know if you remember when Buyoya took over. And there was an democratically elected president who was there, who was assassinated. He was killed, basically.
Leading to the civil war.
Dadae. And then that was taken over by another guy. I can't remember what the name was, but after Dadae, the one who died in the plane crash with Habyarimana. In Tibetan, no, he had a different name. So then there was also the other president who took over, who died in a plane crash with Habyarimana. That occasioned the genocide. But you see, here was also a crisis in Burundi. So Burundi had a crisis, Rwanda had a crisis, Uganda had just gotten off from the NRA because NRA came into power in 1986, so it was still smarting from the past. And where Somalia was basically had collapsed. Ethiopia had the Darg regime in Ethiopia had collapsed also.
Mengistu overthrown.
Mengistu was overthrown in 1991. A new state, basically an old state, but then who got the independence fought very hard. Eritrea emerged. And Moi was able to navigate the interests of this country and our own political stature in the region as well as in the continent and globally in a very smart way. But then there was, but of course, the happenings around us was very helpful, of course, in a sense, you could say. I mean, it's a misfortune to those who are around us who are having all that suffering. But we benefited from that misery, I can assure you about that. But at the same time, we were not just laughing and smarting and being very happy that this is happening to them. We were trying very hard to resolve the issues that we can. So Moi initiated a lot of peace talks with the Somalis here, different factions. Sudan, South Sudan, and the Sudan itself. Then it reached also the height of the conflict in Sudan, which also he midwifed a lot. Of course, the final Naivasha peace talks and the final everything happened because there were also talks in Machakos. Talks in Machakos before that. I mean, he did so much.
Which finally, after he left for in 2005, led to the agreement that led to a referendum.
Well, our role, Kibaki's role in this thing was pretty much limited. Let me tell you, the whole heavy lifting was done by Moi for many years. One, he supported the SPLM through here, but at the same time did not sever his relationship with Khartoum. So he maintained a kind of a clever balance, and at the same time never got involved. You know, there was one of the things that really got the Sudanese center in Khartoum to finally accept an arrangement that ended up in the secession of that country. Yes, was a war that was a war that was participated by 3 countries, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Eritrea. Eritrea joined forces and brought the back of the forces, the Sudanese government forces that were literally, cleaning up the SPLM, SPLA. They were not much for the Sudan government forces. But their back was broken because of this support.
The support from Eritrea.
Which, of course, also came with an American and global and everything. Moi was very clever. He never accepted to be drawn into that conflict at that stage. He never got into that. Although eventually all those countries began having their own share of their own internal differences too, because Eritrea and Ethiopia, who had just Meles and Afwerki fought together, the Darg, and got the independence. But then, of course, he got separated. And then much later, they fought even a much more bloodier and deadlier war.
That ended up with the Algiers Agreement.
That ended up with the land issues that were there. I mean, basically 1998 and 99, I think, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So he was very smart in not committing our forces. If Moi was around, he would have never committed Kenyan forces into Somalia, I can assure you on that, because he knows the consequence. He knows the final. He would have participated in every way. Train them, do all sorts of things, but never cross the border.
Okay.
Yes.
Which happened under the Grand Coalition government.
Yeah.
Professor Hezron Mogambi, he was a man in many aspects regarded as a cocktail in nature and leaves behind a mixed legacy. In terms of the political aspect, many argue that he ruled in regard to the challenges of his age, which according to many he overcame, allowed multi-party democracy in the country, won the subsequent elections and handed over power to Mwai Kibaki. And that is what you don't expect from many African heads of state when he graciously came to Uhuru Park and handed over the instruments of power. However, on the other end, allegations of human rights violations, clamp down on dissent and minimal freedom of expression. How do we interchangeably change this in regard to the mixed legacy Moi leaves behind as he will be laid to rest today?
First of all, thank you very much for having me this morning. I think we must, first of all, appreciate the fact that in all leadership of all styles, there will always be challenges. There will always be people who will be supporting a system of leadership or presidency, and there will always be those who will be against. Whether the leader is doing the right thing or even doing the wrong thing. And so Moi was as well. Because in terms of environment and issues related to environment, he did a lot. He had a slogan of "Ukikata miti moja panda mbili." You know, if you cut one tree, then plant two. And I remember as a young boy during that time, my father. Was interested in cutting a tree which was within our compound. And I remember him complaining that he had to look for the chief to go and get authorization to be able to cut that tree. And so because I didn't understand, I engaged him in asking why he had to get authorization to cut a tree which was within our compound and which my father had planted. And so he had to take me through the fact that even if you planted a tree in Kenya, you cannot just cut it down. And he started now explaining to me how the president, was involved in all this, in ensuring that forest cover increased. And as I grew up, I came to appreciate, as a young boy, of course, going through school, that Moi's strategy was very robust in ensuring that forest cover increased and that nature was very important. And in fact, most of the policies that time, in fact, it is surprising that most of those were not even, constitutional. Honorable Farah here will tell you that we are always agitating for new laws, everything else, which incidentally, most of these things Moi did not have in the constitution or in acts of parliament. But it was just his own pronouncements, charisma and leadership style, which endeared him to the people. And once he made a pronouncement, you will see that things just rolled and, in fact, in effect, became law. And so his tree planting exercise was not only a pronouncement, but I remember as well when we were in primary school, there was, at every class, there was something called Nature Corner. And Nature Corner is where we were all taught, we planted, you know, some samples of trees, some beans, some maize, and we were taught using that nature corner about nature, about environment, about agriculture and all that. And so children grew through that time.
We also had a subject called nature studies.
Nature studies, of course.
Yes.
Nature studies, but now, you know, making it more practical with the nature corner, you know. And so that became more practical for us as we grew. And it was not only practical in class and studies, as Mheshimiwa here is saying, but it was taken out to the people. And he ensured that the environment was taken care of by even starting something, kuzuia momonyoko wa udongo, which was a big problem that time, because soil erosion, of course, ensured that we did not attain food security. And he participated himself in ensuring that this was done. And in most cases, he built gabions, and he was involved in efforts to conserve soil and to ensure that soil was not carried away. And he taught people, actually, practically like a teacher he was, about why it was important to, you know, to take care of this soil and to ensure that the gabions were built and to ensure that the trees were planted. And so you can, in that sense, you can say he taught about it, and practically he did involve Kenyans and lead them in ensuring that that was done, and explained in many public appearances, which were always there, why it was important to be involved in this exercise. Okay. On the flip side, you know, there's also the argument about what was done. You know, I remember the fight over Uhuru Park. You know, when
with Wangari Maathai.
With Wangari Maathai. And you know, it is so because of the same you know, conservation and the issues about land and all that. But finally, Wangari Maathai, you can say, won, and conservationists won. But again, you can also argue that even when Wangari Maathai was involved in that, it is because finally the president saw in his own wisdom that that fight to ensure that Uhuru Park remained was sound, just like he allowed multi-party democracy after pressure, and just like he handed over the torch to President Mwai Kibaki peacefully after, you know, at that time, it was unprecedented. Because in Africa, leaders were known to, even now, to continue prolonging their stay in power and not living peacefully. In fact, when he was leaving, I remember I was at Uhuru Park that time, and he explained, he said very well, that as I had said in 1998, I will leave peacefully. And I have left peacefully, and I want Kenya to be peaceful. And I go to participate in national building like any ordinary Kenyan, and I want to live peace. But he also, later, some other of his cronies explained that there was pressure from those around him to ensure that he didn't leave, you know, the seat. But he said, no, for the purpose of peace and ensuring tranquility in Kenya, let me leave. So even as we balance and see some challenges which he had during his leadership and what vis-a-vis what he did, finally you see that the tip balances very well and leaves him as a person who really led Kenya during turbulent times. And I think the speaker has just explained about what was happening that time in Sudan, what was happening in Somalia, what was happening in Ethiopia, what was happening around the region, Uganda and all that. So when you look at all that circumstance, all those circumstances vis-a-vis the way the president, Moi, you know, led the country in balancing all these issues, not only internally, but also involving external influences, and actually even far off than what was happening in the East African region. That time, you know, the time of the Cold War, that time of, you know, you remember, and it had effects all over the continent. And the way he led the country and balanced all those personal, family, and national interests to ensure that Kenya remained the island of peace, you remember. Well, that is what we were called. You know, you then give credit to him for that kind of leadership.
That is Mr. Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. I mean, encompassed many aspects, as perhaps being the well-packaged man here, the statesman who was wonderfully kind in argument, but equally besides that was so much concerned about the Agenda Kenya. And Honorable Farah, if I may come to you, the aspect of unity in this country is perhaps rekindled after every electoral cycle, and we have a coming together at the moment of President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga under the BBI umbrella to free Kenya from the shackles of political violence. And this has been, of course, the point with which that many Kenyans are worried that in 2017 the elections were contested, in 2013, in 2007 when the ugly spectre engulfed the country after the disputed polls of 2007. I mean, Moi single-handedly managed to ensure that Kenyans lived in peace, unity, despite the exogenous pressure and the turbulent times regionally and internally from the opposition. How do they learn the lesson from the Moi, from the top in this case, and epitomize a man who single-handedly ensured that Kenyans remained glued together and a cohesive nation?
Well, I think there is an opportunity that has presented itself. There's an opportunity for us to re-engineer our societal discourse in terms of political engagement, in terms of maintaining the unity of this country for posterity. Whether that opportunity is going to be informed by inputs that only address personal interests or inputs that do not address any personal interests but address the future of this country, the jury is still out. We don't know what's going to be the final document of the BBI itself. But of course, it's understandable when you have an imperial president. You see, there are a number of contradictions in our own manner in which, and I take part of the blame also because I was part of the political class that worked out this constitution of 2010. Here we have a constitution of 2010 that says, for you to become the president of this country, you must have 50% plus one votes in here.
24 counties.
And 24 counties, which means you must be broadly accepted by the country. But for you to become a member of parliament, you could end up, in Kisii, they end up with less than 20% sometimes of the votes. Because you have 110,000 votes, and the person ends up with 11, 12,000 votes because there are 15 of them. And each one of them gets 8, 9, 7, 6, and they split up between themselves. So the final person who wins that election and becomes the MP for that area most likely has less than 10% of the following of the constituency itself in terms of the people who registered themselves as voters. So that contradiction is there. We did not carry this to all other governors, what do you call
members of the Senate,
members of parliament, members. So we confined this to the presidency only. Now, having done that, having confined that to the presidency only, which in a sense ensures that this particular seat is going to remain as much as possible, as close as possible, a domain of the big tribes.
You're talking about the presidency?
I'm talking about the presidency, yes. A domain of the big tribes was there, which is there in our constitution right now, that you must have so many votes. So when you come now and you have 5 or 6 or 7 candidates, the question is how much are you going to bring into the table? And now you go back to the ethnicity.
So that we attain the presidency?
Yes.
Yeah, because again, what he's explaining is because you see that affects the presidency only.
Yes, it affects the presidency
only.
It doesn't affect all the other elected positions. So why only here and not all the others? Clearly, questions arise as to what was the intention in the first place. The intention was probably to make sure that this office does not leave certain areas, certain regions.
To be specific, Central and Rift Valley.
Central, Western, all of them, if you say the Western bloc is equally a very big bloc. But you see there are 2 major blocks in the country. There's the Western, the Luya, the Luo, the Kisii, who by and large, occasionally would gang together because these are the original Western. And then, of course, the Gema, which is a political organization, and I must give a lot of credit to Moi for having disbanded and proscribed all these tribal associations when he came to power in 1978. Before that, there used to be Moranga Students Union, you know what I mean? There was the Luo Union, there's Abaluya FC, AFC was called Abaluya. AFC. AFC was that, and there was all these tribal things in sports, in university students' associations, in political associations. The GEMA, which ended up with the GEMA Holdings, was the GEMA Embu Meru Association, which of course was done under the eyes and the nose of the first president. So in a sense, if we are going to try and create a situation in which there is never going to be this do or die, deadly duel between which we experienced in the last 3 general elections.
Yes.
Where one big bloc headed by one big tribe and one big bloc headed by another big tribe are the ones who are going to run for these things. So the future is that, look, even if we do certain riggings, we might as well agree to create, share the banquet. The loser can become the prime minister appointed by the president. You know what I mean?
Yes,
so
to share more or less.
Yeah, to share more or less, but then who becomes the victims in this? All the small communities become victims in this.
And that is what Moi fought.
Completely. He never allowed that. So if this thing is going to be something that essentially is going to address the perennial problems between a mountain region and a western region, what do you call on this thing that even if I lose, I'll never give up the seat, regardless of what happens, because this is too sweet. My community has got to have this privileged status. If that's going to be the case, then unfortunately it will never address the problems that Moi had solved over this period of time, which was there before him, which is now going to be after him. But if the idea is going to be how do we unite this country, we don't have to have a presidential elections. Let me tell you one thing. Anytime you say we're going to have a presidential elections, you have an imperial president, this country is divided. The division sets in immediately.
And there are talks of the parliamentary system of governance.
The parliamentary system of governance, in my opinion, is the best and is the only way out for us.
As a country?
As a country. You go and seek your own seat back at home. And even if you're going to be the prime minister, the head of the government, you still go and seek your seat. And then depending on how well you're able to reach out to the rest of the country as the leader of the party, and how many members of parliament you can garner from right around the country, across the country. If you get the numbers, then you become the prime minister. And for you to maintain that status, you must be a nationalist. A prime minister is accountable to the people on the floor of the house,
who represent the majority.
Who represents the majority members of parliament. And that majority members of parliament cannot come from your community. There's no community that today has that kind of numbers, unless they want to try and engineer now. Right now that we're going for a parliamentary system, there is talk, let's revisit the whole thing. Let's reduce the numbers of some people like the northern guys and increase the other ones so that then we still get another majority. So as long as this chickenery, this cat and mouse, this dishonesty, which has defined our politics as a country, as a race. I'm talking about the black race. In all these places. And remember, Kenya is the only country, one of the very few countries in the whole of Africa, that has never experienced a military coup. That has had a pseudo-democracy. It might have not been that perfect democracy, but we had a kind of a democracy, and it's now part of our culture. What I'm able to say right now on the TV, and many Kenyans are able to say, you can't say it in many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Including Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, Ethiopia.
Including the north, including Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and all those countries. You can't say that. Morocco, you can't. You see what I mean? Some of them are monarchies that essentially have absolute power.
And military junta.
Military junta. So what, even with that credit, we still have a long way to unite our country. And the only chance we have right now is this one last chance through the BBI. If we can craft together a system that essentially is going to make it easier for all Kenyans to integrate, for every Kenyan to love every other Kenyan, because you need the other Kenyan for you to wield a certain political power. And you need the nation in its entirety as a unit, not part of the country. You see, this country is so much used to a leader coming in here, and look at now in Central Province. We have Mamau roads, we had the tea roads, we had the coffee roads, you know what I mean? We have all sorts of roads. Now we have Mamau roads, and we have never seen even Kenyan roads in northern Kenya, you know what I mean?
This is not and not tangible, perhaps a state-of-the-art infrastructure roads in northern Kenya. Professor Mugambi, if I may come to you, there is the element about the parliamentary system of governance, and this again, if we are to go that way, means that political parties will be stabilized, and that has been a point with which there was a concern on the number of growing political parties ever since 1992, when we repealed Section 2A in 1991, with regard to the political parties that have sprung up and the political players, but delivery in terms of substantial service to the public. How does parliamentary system perhaps free us from the uncertain political times after every electoral cycle?
I think what we have to understand within our political establishment, first of all, is that the culture of growing political parties, not for purposes of grabbing or gaining power, is what we want to discourage. So that political culture of ensuring that parties grow philosophically and are embedded with ideologies and ideals, which then is what people subscribe to. Like Kenyans will naturally say, I think Wiper is a good party because of A,
they believe in
ABCD4.
Yes.
Okay? So KANU, you remember the late President Moi will always say that please pick people or belong to KANU because you think KANU is good. And because you believe that the tenets of KANU and the philosophy of peace, love, and unity is the best for you. That is exactly what we are saying. And I think that's what Moi was always preaching, that we do not cobble. We have a serious challenge when it comes to party democracy in Kenya, because parties are cobbled up as vehicles for gaining political mileage and accessing political power. Once that is done, these parties become moribund. Look at what has happened. In fact, the only party which has been there for, you can count, apart from KANU, the only other party which has been there for quite a while now in our political arena is ODM. Because most of these parties have
only since 2007.
Yes. But at least it has been
there. The rest have changed.
The rest have been changing every other time. Even the ruling party, Jubilee, if you ask me how many times they have met to discuss the way forward for the country, to discuss ideals, to discuss mobilization, to discuss agenda, you will see that there was even an attempt the other day to meet, which is not...
But was cancelled.
Was cancelled. Okay. So you can see, if you compare with what used to be there during KANU days and other established democracies and how parties are run. I just saw the other day that actually the one who was favored to take over the party after Speaker Angela Merkel leaves office.
Yes.
Angela Merkel, yes.
She has just declared.
No interest in becoming a chancellor.
Yes. She was
the prime minister.
Yes. And actually, if you look at the German right now, Angela Merkel is one of the most popular politicians.
And she made Germany the biggest economy.
And therefore, obviously, the one who was to take over was obviously to run into her shoes and to be very more popular or even better because of the party, the political party of Angela Merkel. And so that is how it should be run. But you see, she refused or she declined to take over because of other reasons. But can you imagine if that was in Kenya?
To happen in Kenya.
In Kenya. I mean, somebody will be running, to take over because I am going to be president. And it's because of the attractiveness of the presidency and what comes with it, and the looting, and the sharing of resources, and all that. So, in a nutshell, we have to look for a way, we have to look for a formula of ensuring that party democracy grows, and that culture is what runs our politics, not personal interest. Because again, there is no difference sometimes between these political parties which we have, which are formed next to elections and which die immediately the elections are held, and personal characteristics or interests. Okay? Because most of these parties we have are cobbled up with Speaker come, yourself come, and somebody else come. You represent this interest, you represent the other interest. You can actually be a tribal chief, this side, the other side. And then let's put these people, ourselves together, and let's appear to represent those interests or the country. And then we run politics. So that in the end, there is no ideal, there is no party culture, there is nothing, there is no discipline.
Okay.
So in the end, it is the country which becomes poorer because the country is not left with ideals to follow or follow a certain political party or vote for it. Because even Speaker Mahari here is talking about voting for the most popular party.
Okay.
Now, which popular party, if those parties do not expose those ideals, they are not sold, because for parties to have members, they must sell themselves. But what do they sell in Kenya? What do they sell? Because they must sell ideals.
Okay.
Like if it is unity, if it is African socialism,
Economic
if
model,
it is economic empowerment,
model.
whatever economic model which the party will follow. And of course, when they take over power, they then follow those economic models.
Just to interrupt the professor, just to add to what you're saying, and you can continue from there. Look at the kind of the things that Jubilee advocated the very first days it came into power.
Yes, jobs, the education.
Double-digit growth.
Double-digit economy.
Double-digit growth.
Yes, of the economy.
Double-digit means 10% and above. 10% and above. Double two.
That is, which was never achieved.
Well, we've never achieved it.
Those are the ideas, the party.
Nobody comes out there and says how we're going to achieve this is A, B, C, D. This is what we're going to achieve. We're going to stop this. We're going to encourage this. The government is going to invest in these things.
Fight this.
We will get a growth of this in this sector. We'll get a growth of this in this sector. And this is how it's going to be a double digit. You understand my point? We will protect this part of the industry, of the economy, the sector of the economy. We will liberalize this sector of the economy. And nobody comes with numbers. You just walk there and you want people to, I say, you've had people say that there was a double-digit growth in China, and then you come and say that we'll have a double-digit growth also in this.
And even doubled the pledges in 2017 when the DP William Ruto said even we will, instead of 5, we'll have 9 stadiums, which never took effect.
Absolutely none.
Okay.
And you see, nobody holds you in the developed world. You see, Moi was very, very clever. He never gave a commitment that he was not able to match with action. Never gave a commitment that he was never able to match with action. Even if he was toying with an idea, and he wanted to say, maybe we can introduce this system, we can introduce this regulation, we can introduce this relationship, he will allow that to be initially floated by the lieutenants, by the others.
Okay, not himself.
Not him himself. And then let it go to the market.
Discourse.
Discourse. Let him see, he sits back and watches how Kenyans receive that. And if it becomes, if he's, in the process he's learning also. The man was a learner. He was a teacher and at the same time a student of politics throughout his life. So then what will he do? He will sit back and watch how that is going to be received by the country.
Then he'll come. Much.
If it's going to be applauded and supported and everything else, then he comes and joins the chorus himself and says, this is what we are going to do. If he has a problem with that and the masses have a problem with that, he says, stop that debate.
Yeah, I don't want this. I don't want. And actually, talking about...
Why? Because he does not want. You see, the old sages, and I am happy that I'm able to say some of these things because when I was much younger, and new in politics, we all fantasized with a lot of things. We fantasized with the kind of the utopian, what we felt was the utopian nature of the way politics was being transacted in the so-called developed world those days.
Okay.
Little did we know that we had not practiced this. It doesn't matter how well educated you are. You have to be widely read on some of these things. You have to. And then when we were talking about the constitution, I can't remember, like 15, 20 different constitutions of all these countries, basically, let me tell you. Whether it's from the canton system to confederalism to federalism to unitary system and the different kinds of unitary system, parliamentary, executive, presidential, all that.
All right.
Only then will you understand that, hey, what we think is utopian is after all not utopian. Yeah. There's a lot to be done. So these are the kind of things. I remember myself in the first term, I was one time invited into a... We modeled ourselves in Mwangaza Trust. We called Mwangaza Trust. I don't know if you remember Mwangaza Trust. Yeah. Because we didn't have the opportunity of being able to set up parties easily at that time. So we put up a trust, which we wanted to use for the political purposes, called Mwangaza Trust. Precursor to Safina. And you would get invited into a social democrat. We said we are social democrats. Yeah, social democrats. Which I believe is
right.
Not a bad. But then you would see somebody who's a social democrat going to a conservative conference, going to a liberal conference, you know what I mean? Yep. Going to all those things. I mean, ODM right now tells us is supposed to be a social democratic party. But do you know that the founder of OB also founded the Liberal Party of Kenya?
Yes, that is Mr. Odinga.
You get my point?
Yes.
Well, founded or basically became part of it. Now that tells you how immature we are in politics when it comes to ideals, and
ideals, ideology,
and philosophies,
and principles,
and economic models.
Okay, yes, Professor Mugambi. Before we go there, you had a point.
Yeah, I was just saying, talking about party ideals and party culture in our democracy. If you remember during Moi's time, I can't remember where there was a party manifesto which talked about enhancing sports in Kenya. But if you look at what happened during Moi's time and sports, some of what happened has never been repeated, even halfway. Look at the building of Nyayo Stadium. Look at the building of Moi Kasarani. And look at what Mheshimiwa was talking about, the party manifesto of Jubilee. Yeah. Compare those. While these were in print, the others were not in print. But Moi was able to do
a lot.
A lot. That is one.
Without necessarily talking loud about it. Yeah.
Look at Kasarani. Look at Nyayo Stadium, where yesterday we had the big ceremony. That is where those are, big.
At the time we had problems. Nyayo Stadium was built at the time when we had problems.
That was in 1983.
Yes, yes. Because of the single party. The moment we became a de jure single party, we started catching from all the democracies and all the multilateral, bilateral, donor agencies, donor outfits. We had problems, and we still put up that thing.
Number two.
We got the Chinese again to put up the Kasarani for us.
Number two.
Yes, Prof. Continue.
Talking about sports, look at what has happened in this country, which has not happened since then, is, if you remember very well, the All-African Games were held here.
Nairobi.
In Nairobi, in 1997. And you remember the attendant effects on the economy. And that was organized, of course, with the leadership of the president. And we have had other nominations for Kenya to host a series of other sports events, which have not come up or have come a cropper because of lack of organization and political leadership to ensure that those kind of sports, global, continental events, come to Nairobi. First of all, to help the economy. Number two, to improve on sports and all that. Thirdly, I remember very well, the late president gave FC Leopards, which was the big team locally, and Gor Mahia. I can't remember exactly where they were given fields, but Gor Mahia, I remember, was given, I think, towards Embakasi, and the FC Leopards was given somewhere else. And those, because those were the big clubs, local clubs at that time. And they were given, exceptions. And they were given the fields to develop as their own fields, like we have in the European
They did not become part of the tribal things that were being prescribed.
Yes.
They were given that exception.
Professor Heston Mugambi and the former Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly and former Member of Parliament who served under the tenure of Moi in Parliament, Honorable Farah Maalim. Yes, I was on you, presumably, or Honorable Farah? We were somewhere before I interjected.
No, I'll first of all want to wish a very speedy recovery to somebody who is also, for all intents and purposes, a nationalist. The Minister Tuju, who got involved in the accident. By the way, he is not without portfolio. His portfolio is coordination.
Actually, it's true.
He has a coordination portfolio. He's supposed to coordinate all the functions of all the ministries, literally, so that there is no duplication, and so that there is a manner in which the party itself, Secretary General of the party, can keep abreast with all that the good things the government is doing. And so I really wish him a very happy, very quick recovery. Tuju defied. Like a few of us who come from minorities in this country, he defied the tribal politics in this country. He went where his heart was without necessarily worrying about what the consequences is and not looking at the self-interest, but looking at the broader national interest. He ran for elections in in Luwe Nyanza.
Yes.
I did a fantastic job in Rarieda.
Yes.
But of course, because of the Raila wave, he knew for sure that he was not going to make it. The performance was not going to become a factor or a criteria in getting elected. It's essentially what was, and he still does that. He's pretty much one of the very few people I have learned to admire and respect in this country who are active in politics. So we wish him a very quick recovery. Secretary General of
Jubilee Party.
Of Jubilee Party, yes. Now, having said that, it's good. It's very, very good. I mean, it's from the look of things, history will always correct itself. History is not written by the sensational headlines that you see. you know what I mean? It's not written by the small elite that is in state capture at different times. It is actually the history of somebody that comes from the hearts of all those who have interacted with him. All those who came into contact with that person would and I have not seen any. You know, with so many powerful politicians in this country, you people are very young. I grew up when Njoroge Mungai was one of the most powerful men in this country.
Who tried to block President Moi?
Yes, yes, it was part of that. But of course, you have to understand that Njoroge Mungai was a medical doctor. He was a physician of the president, a relative of the president in a sense. And at the same time, him and Kiano and a number of them were the exceptions to the rule. Very well educated at the time when we got independence in this country. Minister for Defense at the time when we had the secessionist movement in northeastern province, in northern Kenya, the NFD, the former NFD.
Yes.
And one of the things that I really liked about him is that I remember as a young child, they came to Garissa, and they came in the company of 3 of them. Moi, who was the vice president at that time.
Yes.
And the Minister for Home Affairs, Njoroge Mungai, who was the Minister for Defense, and Tom Mboya. That's before Tom Mboya was killed. And I, as a young child, in standard 4 or 5, I can't remember, I think I was in standard 5, yes, you're right. As a young child, and this is when we were, you know, that war, that secessionist war was not defeated. I don't know if, as part of Kenya, why would you want to leave us? And then Njoroge Mungai also equally came up with a very powerful speech that said, we got independence, we're all Africans. We want to prove something. You Somalis, you are the best. We want you. We don't want the land only, we want the people. But Tom Mboya came and threatened us. You know what I mean?
And later came up with a paper.
Yes, yes, he threatened us terribly bad. The paper was before. So much so that I don't want to say people celebrated when he was assassinated, but nobody shed any tears for him, I can assure you about that. Because he had a multiple personality syndrome. On the one hand, he projected a nationalist, a Kenyan. On the other hand, he had his issues. Among the things he told us is that you can go back on your camels to Somalia. You know what basically saying that what is important to us in the land, not the rest.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is that Njoroge Mungai was there. Tom Mboya was there. And many other people were there. Nobody evokes the kind of passion, the kind of the emotional outflow